The manuscripts of the Wycliffite Bible do not derive from a single archetype, but represent two distinct stages of the text: a literal translation of the Latin Vulgate that reads almost like a collection of glosses, and a more fluent and idiomatic version, much closer to modern English diction. In 1409, reading the Bible in English became a capital crime unless expressly authorized by a bishop, and many preachers were condemned for possessing a Wycliffe Bible. With almost no exception, the 250 surviving Bible manuscripts are expensive artifacts, copied on vellum rather than paper, and embellished with elaborate initials, some in gold. They have never been the property of poor preachers. In fact, one of them can be traced back to King Henry VI. The English Bible was used for private devotion in conjunction with the Latin text read aloud during the liturgy. The margin of many pages have small letters from A to G that help the reader connect the English translation with the Latin lesson. The printing press was introduced in England in 1476, but was not used to produce scriptures until the 1530s. The earliest English translations of the Bible were printed on the continent. They were the work of William Tyndale, a priest and scholar who devoted his entire life to translating the Bible into English and earned a martyr's crown in the process. In his address titled To the Reader, printed at the end of the 1526 New Testament, Tyndale pointed out that he had no English models for his translation. He obviously did not use the Wycliffite version and may not have been aware of its existence. He based his work on the Greek text while also consulting Erasmus' Latin translation of the New Testament, the Vulgate, and Luther's German version. Tyndale was striving for clarity and faithfulness to the original text. What he created was a uniquely beautiful translation that was copied and imitated in almost all later English versions of the Bible. Phrases we read in the King James Bible, such as "Ask, and it shall be given you," "Seek, and ye shall find," "Knock, and it shall be opened unto you," were first printed in Tyndale's New Testament. Copies of the complete New Testament reached London before October 23, 1526, when Bishop Tunstall declared it a forbidden book not to be read within his diocese. Any person owning the book was to surrender it within 30 days under pain of excommunication. 4 days later, on October 27, the bishop presided over a ceremonial burning of Tyndale's New Testament in front of St. Paul's Cathedral. More copies were burned over the next few years, and many people were tried for possessing or distributing them. The destruction of Tyndale's 1526 New Testament was so complete that only 3 copies are known to exist today. Tyndale based his translation of the Pentateuch on the Hebrew text. In an emotional statement at the end of his general prologue, Tyndale declares his willingness to accept corrections if the Hebrew text does not support his translation, and mentions the very real possibility of his being disallowed and also burnt. Many of Tyndale's notes include attacks on the Pope and the Catholic doctrine prelates or priests. Of the 120 notes that contain more than one single word, 22 have disparaging remarks about the Pope, a dozen criticize the prelates and priests, and 2 mention the Popish or the Papists. This is not what a modern reader would expect to find in a translation of the Bible, but verbal violence was not uncommon in the 16th century. The first edition of Tyndale's Pentateuch did not fare much better than his New Testament. Fewer than 10 copies survive. Tyndale managed to print in 1531 his translation of Jonah, a biblical book Luther valued so much that he published it separately in 1526. Only one copy survives, bound with other works, in the British Library. The translator who had done so much for the English Bible was not allowed to complete his work. Tyndale was arrested in May 1535, was tried and condemned as a heretic in August 1536, and suffered martyrdom early in October. He was mercifully strangled before being burned. His manuscript translation of the historical books of the Old Testament was later included in Matthew's Bible. This Bible is the first printed edition of the complete English text, its Editio Princeps. It was translated single-handedly by Miles Coverdale, who remains to this day the only British translator of the entire Bible into English. Coverdale's knowledge of Greek and Hebrew was minimal, and he freely admitted he had used 5 different translations in crafting his own version. To help the reader, he added short chapter summaries at the beginning of each section of the Bible and marginal notes that deal with cross-references and textual problems and do not have a polemical character. The 1535 folio was printed in Schwabacher type, the standard typeface in contemporary German lands. It was embellished with ornamental initials and 158 small woodcuts printed from 68 separate blocks, one of which was repeated 11 times. The title page, sadly missing from almost all surviving copies, is attributed to Holbein. Like most 16th century Bibles, the Coverdale folio is more heavily illustrated in the Old Testament than in the New. Women are almost totally absent from its woodcuts. Only Eve and Bathsheba make a timid appearance. Phrases familiar to all readers of the English Bible go back to Coverdale's 1535 translation, including tender mercies from Psalm 25 and seek the Lord while he may be found from Isaiah 55, and many others that were later incorporated into the King James. The title page of this 1537 Bible, printed in red and black, deliberately concealed the true names of the translators and failed to mention the publishers and the place of publication. The biblical text was not translated by the fictitious Thomas Matthew, as indicated in the printed title, but was put together by combining Tyndale's Pentateuch and New Testament with Coverdale's translation of the sections including Ezra to Malachi and the Apocrypha, and with the previously unpublished version of Joshua to 2 Chronicles, authored almost certainly by William Tyndale. Tyndale had been executed for heresy 10 months before the publication of the 1537 Bible, and Coverdale was known as a Lutheran and was probably living in exile at the time. The person responsible for putting together the 1537 Bible prudently decided to replace their names with a nom de plume that evoked 2 of the apostles. Known as Matthew's Bible, this volume was printed in Antwerp in a press run of 1500. Henry VIII allowed the publishers to print on the Bible's title page the phrase, "set forth with the king's gracious license," and encouraged its distribution. Matthew's Bible was short-lived, but its influence on future English translations was durable. It ensured the survival of Tyndale's translation of the Old Testament and made possible the publication of the Great Bible in 1539, which ultimately led to the King James translation of 1611. Miles Coverdale revised Matthew's Bible with the aim of making Tyndale's version acceptable in Henry VIII, England. He had less than 1 year to complete the work. Coverdale went to Paris to help print the revised Bible. The publishers had arranged with the French printer François Regnault to use his shop for producing the new edition. Thomas Cromwell, King Henry VIII's chief advisor, had chosen Paris as the right place to print the Bible because he believed that good quality paper and skilled workers were available only there. The printer's work progressed rapidly for a few months, but came to a stop when the Inquisition raided Regnault's shop. The English correctors fled, Regnault was arrested, and the printed sheets were confiscated. Some sheets were burnt in Paris, some were sent back to England after protracted negotiations. The details and ramifications of the incident are not entirely clear. An edition of 3,000 copies was released in London in April 1539 and came to be known as the Great Bible. Cromwell had requested that a copy of this Bible be displayed in every parish by Christmas 1538, and surviving records show that many parishes purchased both the Bible and the chain to fasten it to pews, pulpits, or columns. The overall demand for Bibles determined the publishers to issue 6 additional editions between April 1540 and December 1541. The second edition, released in April 1540, includes a beautiful preface written by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and bears on its title page an inscription that indicates its status. This is the Bible appointed to the use of the churches. After the accession of Queen Mary in July 1553, many Protestant ministers and scholars left the realm to seek refuge on the continent. In October 1554, a group of Marian exiles settled in Geneva and founded the Academy of Geneva, an assembly of learned men with a passion for the Bible and a commitment to making it available to everyone. The Marian exiles started planning their own English translation of the Bible based on the original languages and provided with a running commentary that transformed it into a precursor of the modern study Bibles. The Geneva Bible was designed to facilitate the reader's access to the sacred text. It included book and chapter summaries, running titles indicating the content of each page, marginal notes, woodcuts, maps, and tables. The 5 maps and 26 woodcuts, included in the 1560 edition, enable the reader to visualize biblical events and objects. In its 1560 form, the Geneva Bible was readily accepted by the general public and tolerated by the higher English clergy. It was frequently used by contemporary preachers, was quoted by Shakespeare and Milton, and was brought to America by the Pilgrims. Prior to the publication of King James Bible in 1611, the Geneva version was the most frequently reprinted English translation.